All righty. Happy New Year. I think I'm still allowed to say that because we are in January. And I want to welcome all of you to our Voice of Supply Chain show, which is brought to you by the ISM New Jersey chapter. Kathy Perna is the executive director there, and I have known her for, I want to say, maybe 10 years or more. So she's someone who's been in my orbit for a very long time. And when she asked me to host the show, I said, absolutely. The purpose of this show is a little bit different than other shows in our industry in that it's meant to be much more personal and human. And each month we bring a guest on to talk about their very personal journey from childhood all the way through wherever they are in their career. And the purpose is to interview people who are doing what Kathy and I consider to be extraordinary things, which oftentimes are not always visible to the public, but we have people doing incredible things in our space. And I think it's important to celebrate and highlight those things and share them with others. I am your host, Sarah Scudder. This is year 4 of the show. So we have what I would consider made it after year 3. I feel like that's a pretty big win. So didn't want to stop the momentum. And a couple personal updates for me. I just got back from Puerto Vallarta on Sunday. So my tan, which is very rare for me, I normally have very, very pasty white skin, is real. I'm not sure how long it'll last, but my goal is to try to keep it up for as long as I can. And I am hosting the show from Danville Bay Area instead of Austin today. So it is cold but sunny here in the Bay Area. So very, very thankful that I don't have snow or power outages. For those of you that are joining us live, feel free to drop a note in the comments. Tell us where in the world you are joining us from, and a bucket list item that you are for sure going to check off your list this year. Not a maybe, not a I might get to it, something that you're absolutely going to prioritize and do this year. I see that Heather Foch is joining us from the Seattle area, and she says, Sarah and Rachel in the house. Hello, Heather. Thank you for joining us. So again, drop us a note. I will also be taking questions. So if you have anything that comes up throughout the hour today, drop those in the comments and I'll make sure that we prioritize and ask Rachel when appropriate. So with that, I am going to introduce our guest for today. I have known Rachel, I want to say at least 5 years. She has done a lot of work in the direct space. I started in the indirect space and pivoted into the direct. So her and I had a lot to connect and chat about there. So with that, I want to welcome Rachel to the show. Rachel, I always like to start by going way back in time and talking about things from your childhood.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're going to start there. I want to welcome, we have John, who is joining us from Tampa. We have Tom, who is joining us from Vegas. John, who's also joining us from Florida. So we've got a good mix of West and East Coasters who are live. So Rachel, thinking cap on many years ago, let's start with a favorite childhood memory.
So as anyone would probably say, I've had a lot. I think one of the key things for me is I have a twin sister, actually, fraternal. Thank goodness. If there was a me and me growing up, someone would not have survived. So this is really good. So I'm very lucky because I had a counterbalance, a friend. We're very different. So it was always great to learn from that. And I think one of my favorite childhood memories really is Halloween when we were 3. And I dressed up as I wanted to be Petrie from Land Before Time. So I went as this dinosaur and my sister went as a cute cheerleader. And I went as the pterodactyl from Land Before Time. And we just have the best memories from that. I think we had snowsuits, like underneath our costumes because growing up in Buffalo. So I think that was probably one of my favorite ones.
I I remember so I'm the oldest of 4 girls, and we lived kind of in the it neighborhood for trick or treat candy.
Ooh.
So we were the neighborhood where the buses and shuttles and the big SUVs would drop off all the kids, and I remember we used to take pillowcases
Oh yeah.
because our neighbors gave such good candy, and they became so heavy, we would have to literally drag them on the ground because they were full of candy bars.
Absolutely. Yep.
Weirdest thing you did as a child?
So this is an interesting one. So it's not something I did, but it was a question I answered and how I answered it. Now I've been told this story because I was a little young to remember directly, but um, for kindergarten they do an interview, right, to get into this kindergarten we were going to, just to make sure you were ready to go and all this sort of thing. And one of the questions they asked was, what is ice after it's heated up? They're looking for the answer water, right? And I said, well, it's melted. And the teacher looked and she's like, okay, so I technically have to mark this wrong, but I like her thinking. So she requested me to be in her class. And that's been, I've answered a lot of questions like that, similar vein. So always thinking a little bit differently as a child. So yeah, I always just kind of approached questions in a slightly different way. So
So Rachel, the critical thinker.
critical, different, yes. Any just looking at everything from a different perspective. Yeah.
What would you say was the thing in your childhood that shaped you to be the person that you are today?
I would say having a twin, right? Someone to really that could hold you accountable. That's not older than you. You know, we were 30 minutes apart, so she will remind you that every time. She's 30 minutes older than I am. She's the eldest child. But yeah, just having someone to always be that counterbalance, living through it, but in a different way. And again, I always say she's my opposite. She's cute and sweet and nice. When you meet her, you go, I totally get what you mean. But just having that counterbalance kind of from day one, that's probably something that shaped me a lot and made me appreciate other people's perspectives, how other people feel. That was probably the biggest thing.
So my roommate in college, my senior year and a couple years after, her name is Marcy. If she's listening to the show, hello, Marcy. Her husband actually is in supply chain. She's not in our industry, she's in HR. She also has a twin, but they look nothing alike and their personalities are completely different. If you were to put them in a room together, I would not even be able to tell you that they were related.
Same, exactly the same thing. Exactly the same thing.
Most influential person in your childhood and why?
Sorry, sir. I broke off for a second. Say that one more time.
Oh, most influential person in your childhood and why?
Yeah. So if I'm not going to say my sister, for sure my dad. My dad was my coach for everything. He was there. Seeing him coaching me as a child, as an athlete, and now we talk business. So my dad and I have done various business things together, and it's been incredible just having him with me through each of the stages of my life and my development. It's been really awesome having that kind of consistency throughout everything.
So you are married and have a family. You are a mom. So I would like to know one childhood tradition that you've continued on with your family today, something that you did in your childhood.
So growing up, my mom every year bought us a Christmas ornament. And, you know, the day that I moved out and had my own place, I had a whole collection of Christmas ornaments. And, you know, obviously other people would give me Christmas ornaments, but my mom had a special. So with my family, my husband, now my two kids, and the cats. everybody gets a Christmas ornament every year that is just for them, that is special for them. And when they go and do other things, they will take their Christmas ornaments with them. So the cats won't move out. So we'll figure out what to do with those, but everybody else will. So
So interesting that you say that. That was also a tradition in my family. So every year since we were born, we get one ornament a year from my parents. It was my mom's doing and creation, but technically it's from my parents. And it's something that was thematic that represented that year in our life. So it's very interesting now. I'm 40 to look back, and I have 40 ornaments from my parents, and she labels the bottom of each of them with a note and the year that it's from. So I look back and I can definitely see pivots and things in my life that are kind of, if I got a quirky or funny ornament one year, maybe a more serious ornament one year. So I can relate, and I think it's very, very special to have that now that I have my own family and my own tree to decorate.
yeah, there's a lot of penguins and a lot of unicorns in my personal collection. So there was a steady theme through the years.
So, transitioning now a little bit to college life. So, after high school, you went to Michigan State and you pursued. So, this is really interesting. I think you're the very first guest that we've had on the show that has pursued a degree in packaging, which I'm actually shocked was actually a thing back in the day. Supply chain majors are still relatively new, especially at some schools, but wouldn't have even guessed that there was such thing as a packaging major back then. So why did you decide to pursue a degree in packaging at such a young age?
I started college and I was pre-med and I had a 4.0. I was doing great. And then I realized I would be a terrible doctor. I just don't have the patience for patients. That would have just been a tough day for me. And I also liked creativity. I liked bringing pieces together with other people. And I just realized that being a doctor wouldn't have fit. It wouldn't have fit me personally. And I said, well, I'm good in math and science. I'll be an engineer. And one of my very dear friends looked at me and he said, you talk way too much. You can't be like a civil engineer or electrical engineer. Like just not going to happen. And I talked around to a couple people and talked to a guidance counselor. And she said, well, have you heard of this thing called package engineering? And, it's kind of creative and there's some business and supply chain. And I said, sure. Yeah, that sounds fantastic. And the School of Packaging at Michigan State has been around since the 50s, right? It was in response to the war. How do you package food? It was really around food packaging, right? How do you supply food in long distances, stop food waste? So it had been around for a really long time, and it just hit every nail on the head for me. It really made it just everything. I couldn't think of anything worse. And honestly, the other thing that really caught me was at the School of Packaging, you had to do an internship or you had to do a research project. But so an intern, I was like, great, I get to go somewhere. I get to work in the industry and graduate with experience. So really, I think the thing that really put it over the edge was the internship. And they had a whole fair for it. Everybody got internships. No one was without an internship, which was also really appealing.
So was this part of the business school? Was it a business degree or it was actually its own school?
Own school, yes. Part of the College of Agriculture and Natural Resources, bizarrely. But yeah, it was its own separate school within Michigan State. So yeah, my degree is packaging is actually the degree on my college certificate.
Now, is it fair to assume that the program still exists?
Yes, huge. They if anyone knows Amcor bottles, they just spent a lot of money donating to this school. And it is, yes, it is there. It is thriving and bigger than ever. Every year the school grows bigger, they add more courses to take advantage of all the technologies that are coming through. So yeah, it's a fantastic program.
So I started my career actually in the marketing procurement world. So I spent a fair amount of time working with companies sourcing print, promo, apparel, and packaging. And a friend of mine named Corey is a kind of a built a big brand and following in the sustainable packaging space. And he's got a packaging podcast. And I actually might recommend to him that he bring on a professor or two or somebody from the program because I think that could be really interesting for his audience.
Dr. RS is kind of the head of the sustainability part of things. So happy to make a connection if he would like.
Okay, awesome. So you went to school in Michigan. You were a packaging major. Most important thing you learned in college?
I was really lucky at Michigan State. I had a lot of credits going into college, so I could take courses that really interested me because I got a lot of the gen ed stuff like out of the way, right? So I didn't need to take English. I didn't need to. So I was able to use my credits on things that just purely sparked an interest, right? I took a couple religion classes, some philosophy classes, and I think going to a really big university and taking classes that just made me think wider than packaging, right? Gave me this really great perspective of everyone has a different perspective, everyone else has different experience, is thinking about things in different ways, which has really just helped me to kind of step back most days. And when I'm thinking about a solution from a supply chain point of view, it's not with a narrow focus. It's how
Mhm.
does this impact someone else? What is their consequence going to be? So I think really just that there's a lot of things bigger than myself and bigger than what I'm doing or the people that I'm interacting with in my space. That's probably the most important thing that I learned at college.
That was so PG rated, Rachel. We've had
Vodka's
some other
terrible. Vodka's terrible. That's the other thing I learned at college. Vodka is a terrible thing. So that yeah. So
we've had some other guests with, I would say, definitely more R-rated stories. So we'll keep it at that.
I was a perfect child. I had parking tickets. Parking tickets. I came away from Michigan State with a slew of parking tickets that my father negotiated a settlement on. So your father being a good negotiator helps as well in college. So yeah.
So what did you think you were going to do after college?
So by the time I graduated, I had done two internships, right? So I had done an internship with Unilever in Chicago, and I had done what was Kraft Foods at the time, which really ended up being the Mondelez portion of it. But then an internship in Germany, and I knew I was going to live abroad. That was a kind of a non-negotiable. So when I was looking at opportunities after college, I said, I'm not going anywhere in the US. I want to go live abroad. So I knew that was going to happen. And I thought I would be a packaging engineer. I thought I'd do that. I'd do, maybe do some different companies. I'd grow kind of my career. And I knew I wanted to get into management. But I thought packaging was going to be the space where I was really going to just settle into and build my career from there. For sure, living abroad was the one of the other major pieces. And I assumed I was going to live in multiple places around the world for a while.
So, for those who are listening live that may not have a packaging background or have not worked in this space, packaging engineer to me sounds like you would be designing and creating packaging to best suit a product that's shipping. Is that kind of a fair description?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it depends on the size of the company because you start getting like really, really specific, right? When you get into really big companies. But it's how do you create a package that protects your product, that allows your consumers to use the product. And 9 times out of 10, you're also looking at it, how is it economical, right? And then, what is the sustainability element to that? So that also includes how does it run down the line, right? How are your manufacturers able to make it? All these things add in and roll up end of day to your final cost of your product. So yes, it's that piece of the design execution, kind of from the resin that your bottle is going to be using, to that transportation to your line, they're running through the line, and then all the way to the end of life and how much is left at the bottom of the bottle after the consumer uses it. So it's kind of that full landscape.
So when I was in the packaging space, I remember there was a product, and I can't remember the company that was manufacturing it, but they were testing out packaging made from mushrooms.
Yeah.
And the purpose was, once me as a consumer opened a package, let's say it was something holding my hydro flask water bottle, is that I was supposed to be able to take it, put it outside, and it was supposed to decompose in my garden or in my soil.
Yeah.
And to me, I always remember that when somebody mentions sustainable packaging, because I cannot imagine how horrific packaging smells that is made from mushrooms,
Oh yeah.
let alone once it's decomposing in your backyard. So just absolutely makes me think yuck and grosses me out.
Yeah, and I think where a lot of people struggle, and I think one of the biggest things that I've developed over the years is around storytelling, right? Like, how do you describe what you're doing? How do you describe like the purpose and intention? And this is where like greenwashing on packaging gets a really bad rap, because people throw words out there like compostable. Great, but it's has to go to a composting center. You can't just throw it in your backyard and it's going to compost, right? So this is like this whole, how do you talk to consumers about the sustainability is huge, right? Like, cool if it's mushroom packaging, but as you said, if it smells, no one cares, because the consumer is not
Yep.
going to want to like handle something that's super stinky. So the storytelling element is super critical, and that's kind of in general, I would say, as a business thing that people need to learn about is the storytelling piece. But yeah,
So
it's
I
funny that
would
you talk
also
about stinky packaging.
I would add to that not only the storytelling, but what to do with your package once you remove the product from it. So, as a consumer, if somebody tells me something's recyclable, it doesn't tell me what actually to do with it. Does it mean I can just recycle it in my recycling at home? Do I have to take it somewhere? Is it one of those pieces that actually can't really even be recycled at the recycling center and it's actually going to wind up in the trash? So I think there's a lot that can be done with labels and messaging on packaging, not just telling the whole brand and company story as well.
Absolutely. Totally agree.
So I'm not sure if we actually have any college students joining us live, but we likely have people who have children that are in school. We may even have some parents on with college students. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the internships that you mentioned. You said you had two internships, and I promise I did not set this up, but I actually did a post on LinkedIn a few days ago. Heather actually helped me with some input as well. I'm calling her out because she's on live. But I actually had a student who is a junior in college reach out to me and say, "I follow your content on LinkedIn, love what you're doing. I want an internship in supply chain. What do you recommend?" And it got me thinking, I don't actually know a lot about internship programs in our industry. So I text some of my smart friends and compiled all of their feedback, and I did a post with the intention of hoping that that would get shared out with other students who are also looking for internships. So I would love to have you maybe share some advice for college students looking for internships in general, and then if you have any advice in particular for supply chain or procurement internships.
So I think in general, so a couple things, right? Have a resume, have a LinkedIn, right? I will be honest, when I was in college, I did not have a LinkedIn, right? It was also early days, so let's not put too much weight on me that I wasn't doing my jam. But I remember, you did a one-page resume. It had your goals, any accomplishments, and then it also had your course list, stapled on the back. But what I did is I put a green paper clip. My maiden name is Green, right? So I put a green paper clip on the top of my resume. So in a whole stack of resumes, you could always see that green paper clip, and I used a slightly off-white color paper, so just to stand out, right? So,
So it's
you
like the Legally Blonde resume where she sprays it with her perfume is what I'm imagining when you're saying this.
know, yes, and oh yeah, my version of that, right? And so, how do you stand out? Right. And I think that's the key thing to remember, and especially as a college student, like, how do you stand out? And it's going to be different for everyone, but you have a LinkedIn page, you engage in conversations, right? These are all things that really would stand you out across, the lineup of people who are looking for internships. The other thing is, a lot of companies have had very good track records of internship programs, right? And I say this, I'm not judging anyone who this is their first year that they're going to take interns, but you have to manage an intern, right? So if I was going to invest my time in an internship, I'd be looking for a big company. Big companies have lots of resources, programs that have been in place for a long time. They know how to do internships, which means you're going to get something that's worthwhile out of it. Now, small company, you're probably going to get tasked to do everything and anything, which is great, but also people don't have a lot of time to invest in managing you as an intern. So I would highly recommend, if you can, go into a big company with an established program so that you get the most out of your internship.
Yeah, and I'll also add a couple things to that. One is don't be shy about reaching out cold to people via email and LinkedIn. I feel like if you're a student, leverage that all day long. So reach out and say, I am a college student. I'm a sophomore. I'm a junior. I'm a senior. I'm majoring in this. I want to further my education. People aren't typically going to be nasty or rude to you for cold reaching out if you tell them you're a student. So use that as a strategy when you're reaching out, not like an obnoxious salesperson that's cold calling you that hasn't done their research on you and calls you Betty Sue and is assuming that you want to buy the product and set up a meeting in 20 minutes. You're a student, and so spend the time to do some research about companies that you'd actually potentially be interested in working for. And then find people on LinkedIn. You can reach out to them directly on LinkedIn. And you can also often find people's emails. There's some free software. You can often find it. Like if you go to my profile, look at my contact information, I have my email listed there. So
Mine is
don't
too, right?
so don't be shy about reaching out to people cold and asking for help. If someone reached out to me, as in the case that Alex did last week, I don't have an internship, but I know other companies that are, and I have friends that work at those companies, so people can leverage their networks as well. Well, I don't want to spend the whole conversation today on the internship, but you mentioned it. I think it's relevant. And just because I had been asked about it and posted about it, I wanted to pause there for a little bit. So now I want to transition post college. So you had two majors, you worked or studied abroad. How how did you get your very first job in procurement post college?
In procurement post college. Well, first and foremost, um, piggybacking off of the internship, I got a job offer, one from Kraft Foods to go back to Munich. And I also got a job offer with Unilever. The team that I was on in Chicago had actually moved from Chicago to the UK, right? So those internships, I got other job offers as well. We won't go into all of them, but that is how I got my first job out of college, is through my internship. So it's just adding on that. How did I transition from packaging into procurement? What I would say is,
Let's I think that's let's talk about before we do that actually let's talk about your first job post college.
yeah.
What did you do, and maybe a couple learnings as you took that and then kind of built your career and pivoted into your first procurement job?
Yeah. So my first job was on the global hair care packaging team for Unilever. So I was working kind of more on the upstream part of packaging development, looking to do projects worldwide. So, how do you design a bottle that's going to work in Asia as well as Latin America, as well as North America, considering the different requirements in those places, considering different vendors in those places, considering different regulations in those places, right? So, it was a great job. I think the key thing is I never said no to a new project, right? I never said no to, hey, we need someone to help out on global cost savings. Is that something that you would do? And sure, absolutely. Any new opportunities that came through, I always said yes. There was an opportunity that came up to work on, Unilever had just bought Alberta Culver, and they needed someone to do integration of packaging. They needed someone to do, they were going to close a factory, get the packaging lines over. And I always said yes. So I said, yeah, absolutely. Sure. Let me try. I don't know this thing, but I'm going to learn. Right. That's the most important thing that I got out of that, was just learning that if I say yes, good things are going to happen. Right. I'm going to gain more experience. I'm going to gain more knowledge. I'm going to understand more what I want to do. Right. Anyone who knows exactly what they want to do when they're 22 years old, send me a message, write a book, because I know most people do not know exactly what they want to do when they're in their early 20s.
I
So
still don't.
just
I'm 40 and I still don't know what I'm gonna do.
exactly, right, Sarah? So for me, it was really just that saying yes and understanding that that's going to open more doors and give me a better sense of what do I want to do. So that was my first job out. And again, a couple evolutions, global packaging, then went to regional European packaging to do the Alberta Culver integration stuff. But yeah, that was my first role out of college, and just learning to say yes. That was the biggest learning.
And I'll also throw in, if people aren't coming to you with projects, go ask for them. So you were lucky in that you were asked. That's not always the case. So seek
Correct.
out, if you feel that you can take on, even if you've got a full workload, but you can take on a stretch project, go to your boss and say, I would like to learn more. Please think of me and send more projects my way.
Absolutely. And not just your boss, but other people, right? Building those relationships would go hand in hand with what I said about saying yes, but investing in the relationships, in the relationship building. And we'll talk about how I jumped into procurement, but that came through a relationship, right? That wasn't me applying for a job. That came because of a relationship. So it's hugely important in having the confidence, as you said, Sarah, to ask. Hugely important.
So you spent what I would consider to be a long time at your very first company out of college. And so it was about 7 years or slightly less at Unilever. Why did you stay so long?
I think I stayed so long at Unilever because there was a lot of opportunity, right? Unilever was a really big company. They invested a lot in their people, right? I had access to every training I ever wanted to go to. There was always opportunities. You saw people moving around the world, changing from one group to another. I changed from procurement into packaging, right? And I didn't need to leave to do that. So because there was always opportunity, that they were investing in me, and that I was able to also stretch myself and continue to grow. That for me was a huge thing. Also, I really liked Paul Pullman, who was the CEO. He's the one, he has a great book called Net Positive. We were doing good stuff. We were trying to double the size of the company while having our environmental footprint. And that was really aspirational. And for me, I was like, wow, that's so cool. That's really cool that that's the ethos of the company. And you saw actions being taken to try to achieve that goal. So for me, I think, personally, day to day, the investment in my ability to continue to grow, hugely important. That's why I stayed. And I'd had offers to go elsewhere, right? But that's what really kept me to stay was that. And then also just working for a company that I felt really proud to work for, that was hugely important for me as well.
So when you left, what role were you in? Because you moved up a few times over the course of the 7 years.
So I was an associate manager for procurement operations. I was supporting deodorants and oral care at that time. But so yeah, I wasn't super senior when I left, but I had really dynamic experience of the packaging engineering side and then the procurement side. And those two things together, you don't get a lot of. And when you're talking about people who run procurement departments and procurement teams, you see a big need for packaging procurement specifically when it comes to FMCG, and having a background in package engineering just kind of puts you at another level in terms of when people are looking at candidates. And I took the role at People Against Dirty, the Method brand or EcoVare brand of products, as their manager of packaging procurement. And it's a small company. And so as the manager, I was doing all of the packaging procurement, right? There was no one, I had a boss, the head of procurement, and that was it, right? So it was a very small organization in comparison to Unilever, where you had hundreds of people, working on that sort of space.
Mhm. So I'll throw in there. I think looking back on my career, one of the things that I wish I had done in my 20s is not necessarily picked a job for the money, but for the learning. And
Yeah.
I think sometimes we see, wow, I can make so much money, and we chase that versus maybe making a different career decision to pivot into a role where we may not make as much, but we're going to learn a ton, and that knowledge will catapult your career later in life. And it sounds like you were wise enough and smart enough to do that, to learn that those core foundational principles so you could catapult your career later.
And I think, Sarah, it's a really astute observation. And it's definitely what drew me to People Against Dirty. Was at Unilever, I had a very narrow sliver of the total procurement ecosystem, right? I had a very small responsibility. I had a lot of understanding of, here's what the portfolio people are doing and here's what the regional people are doing, but I didn't own that. So going to People Against Dirty, I owned the 5-year contract. I owned the day-to-day vendor relationship. I owned the calling, chasing trucks, right? So having that opportunity to take, hey, I understand the full picture, but I've never owned it. This allowed me to actually have that ownership piece of the bomb setup and the pricing changes and the writing yes on PPV, right? So it was a nice opportunity to gain that ownership, which I think has really helped in that catapulting of the career.
So you pivoted to Method Products, which was the name of the company at the time. And one of the things that I think was interesting early on in your career in that role is you experienced an acquisition,
Yep.
which is something that people go their whole lives and never go through that. So would like to have you talk a little bit about what that was like from your perspective, being on a very, very small procurement team.
Yeah. So my first experience with a merger and acquisition was when I was at Unilever. So it had already been done, right? The deal was signed, the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed. And I was doing that. Hey, I'm going to get all your specs, Alberta Culver, and I'm going to put them into our system. I also knew that we were closing their factory, right? And we were moving it over to Compiègne, France. Um, and I was really, really lucky when I was at Unilever because I was on this integration team and we talked a lot about culture and people. And it was really interesting. So when it happened to me, because I say, I've bought and I've been bought, right? When we were acquired, I understood what it meant to be on the other side of the equation because it's real easy when you get acquired, right? I remember the day it happened and we all got brought together and people were crying. People like just didn't know what was
Mhm.
happening. It was super overwhelming. And I'm like, um, and I also understand what they're going through too, right? Because it's not just one-sided. So for me, managing the anxiety of people was really, really important. We're not going to have all the answers, right? But seeing how great the leadership team was and giving as much transparency as they could really helped me to manage my team. And I said, look, there's going to be opportunities with this, right? We're being acquired by a bigger group. We're going to get more money to grow faster. We're going to, there's going to be opportunities for people on the job front. And I knew for me personally that there would be opportunities, and there was, right? I got promoted to the head of lifestyle brands, right? They brought Mrs. Myers and Baby Gannix in as one new division, and I got to be head of that procurement team. So not overreacting to what had happened really, really helps. And I'm not saying it was perfect for everyone. And I lost half my team. Their roles got moved to Racine and they did not want to do it. However, SC Johnson, for everything, they treated people really, really good, right? This was life-changing for a lot of people on my team. They really just took care of people through the process, financially and, just emotionally. And so even my team that did not stay through the full of the transition, it was game-changing and life-changing from them. And I want to say most people were really grateful for the whole process at the end of the day.
So you were there a few years, and then you took what I would consider to be a pretty massive leap from I think it was a director role, or senior director role, into a VP role at Revlon, which is a big, well-known brand. You seem to have a love or passion for retail brands.
Yes.
So why did you decide to take that leap and take on a VP role?
And here's a couple like solid 101 facts. My career at SC Johnson was going to be limited because I was not going to go to racing, right? And that's just fact, right? That's not bad. I don't have any qualms against the fact that, if I really wanted to continue to move up at SC Johnson, I was going to have to go to racing. That just was not going to work for me and my family. So really, I said, okay, I got to start looking longer term. Where do I have opportunity?
Meaning, just to clarify for the audience, you weren't going to move. That was not an option for your family.
We weren't going to move to Racine, Wisconsin.
Got it. Okay.
So, we were open to moving, but my husband's British, and just what he does for work. And he said, look, I don't feel like it's going to be a good fit for our family. And I agreed just, in terms of what we were looking for in a place to live. Racine, Wisconsin wasn't it for my family personally. So we said, we're going to have to, we'd have to look at something else. So started to look for opportunities, and a recruiter reached out to me for the Revlon job. To be honest, if on paper, I don't know if I would have said, I'm going to go apply for that role. I'm fairly, I don't have a problem like looking at a role and saying, I can do these things. I'm not going to be too concerned about this one thing that I didn't do, but it did seem like a big jump. Right. And having the recruiter reach out to me, I was like, oh, well, at least they're interested. Well, let's have the conversation. And the more we talked, I was like, I can do this. Right. I know I can do this. It's not as scary when you actually start talking about what they need versus what's written on a piece of paper or the job title itself. And I think that's a key thing to take away is have the conversation, apply for the job. And if it's not a right fit, you can always step back and say no. But Sarah, I was lucky. I think it would have taken a while for me to think, oh yeah, I'll start applying for VP roles where my spend is over $1 billion, right? I think it would have taken me some time to get there. So very grateful for Bob Callahan, who reached out to me and saw something in me. And he saw something in me, just through LinkedIn and some other things as well.
So my next question for those who may be on the call that are job seeking themselves or hiring, have open roles, how did you get found?
I'd have to ask him like specifically how. He was looking for people with procurement experience, with FMCG experience. And then at the time specifically, they were really struggling on packaging. And a lot of people were struggling with packaging at that time. That was still deep in pandemic mode. That was at the end of 2021. So anyone who did anything with packaging at that time was still really struggling, right? Packaging was a real sore spot. Chemicals too. I'm not in indirect, but really packaging was a huge bottleneck, for lack of a better term, no pun intended, for a lot of companies. And they thought that my deep experience was really relevant. And I think one of the things that also stood out for me and why he reached out to me was the big company and small company experience that I had. And that's seen as really valuable, being that you know how to operate within a big organization, but you also know how to roll up your sleeves and get your hands dirty. And I think that was something they mentioned a couple of times during that process. So
a couple takeaways I'm hearing. One, packaging is potentially an interesting pivot for people who are looking to get a new and different skill set, or if we have any students or people starting their careers, that might be something to look at. And then looking at having the small and big experience in your resume, as you're kind of planning your career trajectory, that's something that I think is good for people to keep in mind as well.
yeah, absolutely. And Sarah, I think if you had to ask me like either or, I would say invest in big and small versus multiple different industries, right? Like I've always been in consumer products. Now you could argue, oh, is soap the same as cosmetics? No, but I've always been in consumer brands, right? And so that dynamic, the needs that come along with that, I would say your value is best in, hey, I've done it in a big company and a small company versus, oh, I've done consumer products and then I went and did hospitality. And then that's valuable in a different way. But if you had to say, which would I choose? I would choose the big and small and keep in the same industry.
So when I think of Revlon, I think of something blowing up in relation to a bankruptcy. And you were there, you lived it for almost a year. What was that like emotionally for you, starting a brand new job and then getting some crazy news thrown at you that your company was bankrupt and you maybe can't pay your suppliers?
It was a completely overwhelming experience, to be honest. And this is me being super transparent, Sarah. This is how I roll. I think I literally was just in shock. So I was in action mode. There was no crying. There was no, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? It's like, how are we going to get this done? And I just went into action mode. I had a standing meeting every Saturday and Sunday, for a good number of months. And it was just action. We had to build the process of how do we go through bankruptcy with our vendors. Like I had to build a process to even address, how do we call our vendors? How do we communicate with our vendors? How do we buy stuff when we're in bankruptcy, right? Like, so this, it was all very just go get it done. We don't know the right way how to do stuff, but we're going to do it together. And we're going to just communicate what we know, what we don't know. And we're going to work this out. We're going to figure it out. Right. And so I was, from an emotional standpoint, I think I just went numb and just started going. Right.
I think I would have been a train wreck and a little more chaotic and disorganized than you.
I think it was the only thing to keep me from crying. Right. So, but it did wear on me. Right. And really retrospectively, I should have taken a lot more attention to recognize my emotion, like kind of through the process, because it did totally burn me out by the end. Right. That's just kind of me being really honest about it.
So after what I would say a very roller coaster job, I don't think there's many that can say that they've lived through a bankruptcy, and that's a good thing. Let's hope we keep that number very low. You had a few months to figure out, what does Rachel 2.0 look like?
Yeah.
And I remember speaking to you many times as you were going through your job search and building up your brand on LinkedIn. And job hunting can be really tough. It's really emotional. It can point out some of the things that you maybe don't feel good about yourself. We have the whole imposter syndrome thing that kicks in. What did you learn about yourself going through the job hunting process that you're would be comfortable sharing with the audience today?
Yeah. So first and foremost, the thing that I always say is I'm really proud of what I did at Revlon, and I'm really proud of the team at Revlon. The thing I'm most proud of is my vendors still wanted to talk to me afterwards and still wanted to work with me, right? That made me feel really good about what I had invested in through that process, and I still talk with the people that I worked with for the most part. So very very proud of that. But the job search is really tough, right? I know people who search for a year, right, to get a job, and that can really wear on you. And I think, Sarah, one of the best things that you said to me was, well, Rachel, you got to clean up your LinkedIn, and you don't post anything. So post, go and post, be active. And I think actually what really helped me through not just the job search process, but also formalizing what I wanted was using LinkedIn. Now, I'm not saying everyone wants to do the thing that I did, but I used it as like therapy. My goodness, I just talked about everything and anything having to do with supply chain, job search, leadership, thought leadership, right? And so for me, one of the things I learned about myself was giving myself a platform and a voice really helped me through that process, right? I wasn't taking everything on myself. I wasn't living alone through the process. So you don't need to have a job to have a voice, right? You have this great LinkedIn network to use. I got speaking opportunities, which was phenomenal and fantastic, and that helped me to remember that just because I'm not doing a supply chain or procurement job day to day, I still have thought leadership in that space. And seeing the reactions from people on LinkedIn really, really helped me to do that. So I think not losing your voice during that process really helped me. And I'd really suggest people to use LinkedIn or another platform, right? Go to Substacks, write articles, right? There's lots of different ways to do it, but keeping that voice during the process is really, really helpful.
So you landed a VP of procurement role. Um, Talk to me a little bit about what you're doing in this new role, and maybe what does success look like for you in 2024 in this role?
Yeah. So I'm the VP of procurement at Harvest Hill Beverage Company. It's my first time since I was an intern, right? First time in food and beverage, but again, still consumer products. We make Sunny D. We make dailies. We make little hugs. Lots of your kind of well-known drinks in the space. The big difference for me is that this is my first time in a private equity backed company. I am learning a ton just based on private equity, right? So um, I've grown a ton. If you asked me over a year ago, would I be hedging corn? I would have said no. Why would I hedge corn? I am hedging corn right now, and locking in co-products. Very, very important for anyone who's hedging corn. So I'm learning a ton every day. So if I look what success in this role looks like in 2024, it's continuing to support our growth. We're growing. It's fantastic. It's great going into a conversation with a vendor and saying, do you want my business? We're growing. A lot of people can't say that right now. So, but success means that we're supplying our factories to make more product, right? That's thing number one. So as long as we're doing that and doing that in a sustainable way, which means managing costs and our vendors, all these sorts of things, that's success number one. But number two is that I'm continuing to learn, right? I'm continuing to learn for me personally. I have a great team, and I'm working with them on making sure that they're learning and growing. Um, but I'm still learning the ins and outs of all these things that I'm managing for the first time from a portfolio perspective. But also I'm learning more about the private equity space. It's just something that I've never been a part of before, and there's their own intricacies and dynamics and things like that. So I have a ton more to learn, and I'm super super excited to say 24 will be a success if I can continue to enjoy that learning process that I've been on since I joined last June.
So one of the things that I think about when I think of you is some advice that you shared with me for some. I don't remember, it was another interview or show that we were on together, and you're the only person that I've ever heard say this before. So I'm gonna say it for the audience. You said, as a procurement professional, you should be able to put a supplier as a personal reference. And to me, that kind of sums up, I think, one of the things that makes you such a unique leader in our space is that you absolutely prioritize your supplier relationships above most other things. And you've been able to build supplier management programs to help your team put processes and systems to prioritize those relationships. So, would like to have you share some advice around how you've been able to be so successful at this.
I think the key thing that I always come back to, and I say this to my vendors, and I've said it since day one, right? Was I want to tell you what you need to do to be successful with my company, right? This isn't about hammering down price. Good example. I was just in a meeting a little bit before here. I'm actually in Sherman, Texas, at our wonderful Sunny D factory, and this vendor wants to do more with us. And they came through with a proposal. And I said, this is not going to work. There's no way that I'm going to get this signed off, but I'm going to tell you how we're going to pitch it and what we're going to change in order for me to bring this to my business, because this is what we need. This is what we need to succeed. And I think it's going to sell really well into your business as well. And he sat there and he's like, wow, none of my people that I work with, like at my other customers, have ever sat down and done that with me. We basically built his proposal to me together, right? And again, this is about how do I enable my vendors to know what my business needs in order to be the most successful version of themselves. And it brings back dividends, right? And that's why people want to invest in the reciprocal side. So when I call him because there's an issue, he picks up my phone, right? So I'll be the first ones there when I'm like, this is a problem, this is an issue, but I also help them succeed within my business. So
I think another key thing that you and I have talked about, and I've seen very successful in other leaders who also prioritize supplier collaboration, is openly sharing data.
oh yeah.
So you need data sharing is a two-way street. It's not just the supplier providing their customer with data, but it's the customer saying, we have challenges in our business. Here's predictions, here's forecasts, here's demand planning changes and updates. And people sometimes keep that so close to the vest because they think it's going to make them or their company look bad. But by not sharing and communicating that with your supplier can't advocate for you and can't come back and provide the best solution. So I think that's really, really important to have a successful supplier program.
Absolutely. And to add to that, do you know what people don't share to their suppliers? What their company is doing, how their company is performing, like big level, right? Here's the growth. Here's the launches that we've done and the growth of our business as a whole unit. This is how stable we are. Or, hey, we're struggling in these groups. Like I had to go and say, like, juice costs us through the roof right now. So the volume on this piece of our business isn't growing how it is with Sunny D because we're just really struggling. So I think it's, yes, it's the performance piece, Sarah, but it's also the bigger context in the story, so that when this gentleman goes back to his senior leadership and goes, this is why we want to invest in Harvest Hill, he doesn't just have the performance data that he has. He also has, this is what the company is doing. They just dumped $70 million to make more Sunny D. We put that into our factories, right? So we're investing. They too should invest with us, right?
So we are at what I call my Spitfire round. I'm going to close out with asking you a few questions, and I want you to respond with the first word or phrase that comes to mind.
All right.
Accomplishment you are most proud of.
Surviving the bankruptcy at Revlon.
Quality you admire most in yourself.
My authenticity.
What are you binging?
Powerlifting right now.
Biggest pet peeve?
People shaking their salads to get the salad dressing over them.
Bucket list item you plan to check off your list this year.
Oh, I cut out for a second. Say it again.
Bucket list item you plan to check off your list this year.
You stumped me. No, I'm getting back on the platform. I'm getting back on the platform this year, and I hope to get back to nationals for powerlifting this year. That's my bucket list thing for this year.
All right, we are at the end of time for our show. If you are not yet following Rachel on LinkedIn, I highly recommend you do that. She posts some great content, is super authentic and real, and a great resource in the industry. Join us next month on Wednesday, February 21st at 2 Eastern Time, as I will be interviewing our next special guest, talking about her extraordinary career and some of the things that she's done in the space. Wishing everyone a wonderful afternoon.